Hey, so just before I start, I wanted to let you know that I've got this sample pack coming out with Prime Loops called the Neon Future Bass Sample Pack. It's got tons of drums and synths and bass and sound effects. There's some vocals in there. All of it's both hits and loops. And the synths and the bass come with MIDI included, so you can see all of the notes to everything that's going on. And in cases where there's chord progressions, the file names actually have the names of the individual chords in them to make it easier for you to learn the chords. It's a pretty useful resource for anyone who's trying to learn this kind of music to sort of dive in and see the sort of things that I would put in a song. Additionally, it comes with 22 massive presets. So all of them have all 8 macros assigned, and I'm actually really proud of them. I think it's the most useful part of the whole sample pack, and you should check that out. Hey guys, it's Pusher here. I'm back with another tutorial, and this time I'm going to talk about music theory, just sort of generally. I want to make sure that everyone who watches these tutorials can keep up with everything that I'm saying. So today's is going to be just very basic theory for people that maybe haven't gone to school for it or haven't studied it at all or haven't taken any private lessons or anything. Just so everyone can get just the basics. And then I'll do a part 2 of this later that has more advanced chord stuff, the sort of thing that you might see in maybe 70s or 80s stuff, Michael Jackson stuff, and then leading up through like the R&B and that sort of tradition into the future stuff that we're doing now. People like me and Lido and Wave Racer and Maxo and Lindsay Lohan and those sort of people who use more advanced and interesting chord progressions in their stuff. And that's what I really want to get to. But today I'm just going to cover basic stuff. So just basic notes on the keyboard, intervals, major and minor scales. I'll go over the overtone series and the circle of fifths. And then at the end I'll talk about just basic triads, how chords are kind of constructed. And then I'll hint at more advanced chords, seventh chords and extensions and stuff like that, which I'll cover later on, as well as some more advanced chord progressions. By the way, I'll post links to all the images that I'm using here to make it easier for you to reference them and learn about them. And this is all stuff that, I'm kind of going through it quickly in the tutorial, but all of this you should sort of spend time on it and try to internalize it and memorize it, because it's all going to be really, really useful when you're trying to create music. So let's get started here. This here is just a basic keyboard. If you're not familiar with this, you need to spend some time just getting familiar with this. There are 7 notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they just repeat and repeat and repeat up the piano. Sharps and flats like this. So a sharp, as you can see, raises a note by a semitone, and a flat lowers a note by a semitone. Now, I was just using the word semitone. That's sort of, once you get a handle on your notes, you have to start to look at relationships between notes. And these are called intervals at the basic level. An interval is just a distance of space between 2 notes. The 2 basic intervals are a semitone and a whole tone, or a tone. A semitone is any 2 notes that are immediately next to each other, like C and C sharp, or E and F, or any 2 notes that are right next to each other. A whole tone, or a tone, is when you combine 2 semitones. So C and D are a whole tone apart, D flat and E flat are a whole tone apart, E and F sharp are a whole tone apart. And those are sort of the 2 basic intervals. When you're constructing a scale, like this scale here, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Sounds like this. That's sort of the basic major scale. This is the C major scale, for those of you who don't know. And it's constructed, as you can see here at the bottom, out of a combination of tones, or whole tones, like between C and D, and semitones, like between E and F. This combination of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, is what makes a major scale. Now here we have the all white key scale, the C major scale, which is, by the way, the only major scale that has only white keys. All the rest of them will have at least 1 and up to 5 black keys in them. But if we were to take these notes, or if we were to take the tone, tone, semitone thing and apply it to any other note, here I'll start, you can see the keyboard down here. It's kind of small, but hopefully you can see it. If we were to start on D and go tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, we've taken this pattern of intervals and we've applied it to start on a different note. And now we can make the D major scale. And you can do this on any note. There are 12 different notes. before it starts repeating. There are 7 white keys and 5 black keys. And you could start a major scale on any of them, so there are 12 different major scales. Now, all of the different notes of the major scale have sort of different functions, and they sort of rank in terms of importance. Now, if you're playing in the key of C, what it generally means is that you're using the notes of the C major scale. If you're playing in the key of E, you're using a different collection of notes. If you're playing in F minor or any other scale, you're using sort of collections of notes. And just as sort of a note, when you're thinking of scales, you can think of a scale as like a staircase of notes. It's actually related to the French word escalier, which is staircase. So that's just a helpful thing if you're trying to explain it or remember it. With the scale degrees here, all of the different notes of the scale have names and numbers. So when you're playing the scale, like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, you can also think of them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. All of these different numbers of the scale have different names and different functions. So maybe this is obvious, but the most important note, if you're using the C scale and you're playing in the key of C, the most important note is going to be C. Now, the second most important note is going to be G. It's a fifth away. That's important. I'll talk about that more in a second when I talk about the overtone series, the harmonic series. But a fifth, like from C to G, I'll show you here on the keyboard, from C to G, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a fifth is the most important interval in music. So C is the most important note, it's called the tonic. G, second most important note, is called the dominant. It's the second most important note because it's a fifth away. Now, the third most important note is going to be F. Here it is. If you think about F as being a fifth below the tonic, it starts to make sense. So this fifth relationship is actually really, really important. So C, the tonic, G, the dominant, F is called the subdominant actually because it's the dominant below the tonic. It's like a fifth below. So we've got C and F and G. The next note that I'll cover is D, the supertonic, which literally just means above the tonic. And then 7 is the leading tone because when you're playing the scale, B kind of sounds like it's leading up. So it's called the leading tone because it leads up to C. Now 3 is equidistant between the tonic and the dominant, the two most important notes. And we call this the mediant because of its placement between the two notes. And then 6, the only note that we haven't covered yet, is called the submediant because it's equidistant between the tonic and subdominant. So if we just look over here, you can see the tonic, the most important note, supertonic above the tonic, mediant halfway between the tonic and dominant, the subdominant a fifth below the tonic. There's the dominant, fifth note, the most important, second most important after the tonic. The submediant, equidistant between the tonic and the subdominant, and then the leading tone because it leads up to C, or leads up to the tonic. Now, this is useful to know because now you can look at different songs in different keys, and if you think about them as numbers rather than as individual chords, you can start to compare different chord progressions in different keys as though they're all in this sort of one master key of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'll sort of try to explain what I mean. Like if you're playing a chord progression that goes C, F, G, C, it goes 1, 4, 5, 1. If you were playing a chord progression that goes E, A, B, E, you can hear how it sounds the same, just a little bit higher. That's because it's exactly the same chord progression, but happening in the key of E. It's 1, 4, 5, 1. And so thinking about chords as numbers rather than as letters allows you to compare different chord progressions in different keys as though they're the same thing, which is basically what they are. And that's kind of where you want to get, because you don't want to be looking at two of the identical chord progressions in different keys and not be able to see the connection between them. So thinking of scale degrees and getting used to this is really handy. Now this is going to take a lot of time because it takes a long time to learn 12 different major scales. So that's going to take some time and practice, and you might have to like sit down at the piano and do that. But if it's something you're interested in, getting used to chord progressions, it's something that's worth spending some time on. And if you're even just looking at a few keys that are really common, like if you're a DJ and you get a whole bunch of songs and you notice, oh, well, a whole lot of these songs are in C and F and G, you can get used to those 3 scales first and then sort of branch out from there. It's a big undertaking to get used to 12 different major scales, but I think it's ultimately worth it if you want to kind of make more musical stuff with more advanced melodies and more advanced chord progressions. I also wanted to mention the major scale is sort of it's like the master scale. Everything else comes from the major scale, all the other scales, including the minor scale. And what I mean by that is if you play all the white keys from C to C, it makes a C major scale. But if you play all the white keys from A to A, it makes what's called the A natural minor scale, which is basically just the minor scale. If you were studying classical piano as a kid, or if you're doing it now, or if you ever study it, they're going to show you the harmonic minor scale and the melodic minor scale. Now the problem with A natural minor is that, here you can even see it right here. If you start on A and you go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, there's no leading tone. Now because A is the tonic of A minor, anything that leads strongly to A is going to be an important note. And the fact that there's no leading tone takes an important part of the scale out of the scale. So what people have done over the last few hundred years is they've devised different ways to put in a leading tone. So you can play like A, B, C, D, E, F, G sharp, A. And they'll just take the G and they'll raise it up to a G sharp to make a leading tone that leads up to A. I'll show you on the keyboard down here too. And so they just take the G and they raise it and change the scale. This is called the harmonic minor scale. If you ever practiced scales when you were little, then you've seen this thing before. Now the problem with this is that in Europe at the time they were doing this, this wasn't a particularly trendy sound. That top 4 notes of the harmonic minor scale kind of sound a little Eastern, so I guess just stylistically and even culturally it was sort of frowned upon. And I think even forbidden, but I could be wrong about that. So what they did is they would raise the 6th note as well, so that you could have the leading tone and also not have the Eastern sound. So this creates what's called the melodic minor scale, because you can create melodies with it basically without having that Eastern sound going on. Now the deal with the leading tone, of course, is that you only need it to lead up to the tonic. So if you ever practice scales, then you'll know that the melodic minor scale, when you're going up, you raise the 6th and 7th, and when you're coming down, you lower them again. Just for the sake of comparison, I'll play the C minor scale. You can see that relative to the C major scale, the 3rd note, 6th note, and 7th note have been lowered. So if we created the harmonic minor scale, you put in the leading tone, and if the melodic minor scale, you would raise the 6th and 7th on the way up, and then on the way back down, you play the natural minor scale. Natural minor scale just comes from the fact that it hasn't been changed from its original form as a version of the major scale, like how the A minor scale is all white keys just like C major. It's called the natural minor scale just because it it naturally occurs with the same notes as its related major scale. And A is actually called the relative minor of C major, just like C major is the relative major of A minor. And every major scale has a related minor scale, and I'll talk about that in a second too. One last note about intervals. When we were talking about semitones and whole tones, those are just sort of basic two intervals for making scales, really. But intervals can measure any distance between any two notes. So typically they're measured as things like seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths. And what I mean by that is you're counting letter names. So I'll show on the keyboard here. From C to D is a second. From C to D sharp is also a second because it's from C to D. So you might say that's confusing, but I'll link a resource to intervals. They're actually different kinds of seconds. One's augmented and one's a major second. And then C to D flat would be a minor second. C to E is a third. C to F is a fourth. Notice we count all the letter names like C, D, E, F. 1, 2, 3, 4 is a fourth. C to G is a fifth, like we were talking about. The most important interval there. C to A is a sixth. C to B is a seventh. And C to C is an octave. So past an octave, I mean, it keeps going. You can do like a ninth. And it basically just keeps going like that. The next thing I want to talk about is the harmonic series, or the overtone series, because it demonstrates why the fifth is so important, which is going to turn out to be huge in the rest of these tutorials. So this is the overtone series here. If you can't read music, basically these are just getting higher, and I'll talk about what notes they are. But the important thing is, when you are playing an instrument or a synthesizer or creating any sound, if you were to play a note on a piano, for example, say you're striking a C like this C here. If it were on a real piano, the entire string would vibrate just like this. But sort of within that, also the half length, third length, quarter, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, and so on, these are all vibrating as well. And to a certain extent, you can hear within it sort of higher frequencies. Now, the exact combination of frequencies that you hear, like, you're going to hear them all, but sort of at different volume levels, depending on what instrument it is. And the different overtones that come out sort of almost determine the sound of the instrument, whether it's a violin or a piano or a synthesizer or whatever. The overtones that you hear on top of it very much determine what instrument it sounds like. Now, the note that you actually strike is called the fundamental, and everything else is overtones. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you play a C, the next few notes you hear are C an octave higher, which is created by a half length of the string, G above it, which is created by a third length, and then C above that. So you have C, C, G, C. And these are all notes that you hear within the fundamental, all simultaneously when you strike one key. And it happens on every instrument. It happens with a voice, it happens with a clarinet or a violin or a synthesizer or anything. Well, synthesizer might be a little more synthetic and weird, but you're going to hear these overtones in anything natural, certainly. Now, remember that's C, C, G, C. If you were to have, say, a piano play a low C like this, and you can hear the overtones coming out of it like that, if you were to take an EQ and cut off right here, cut off the low C, your brain will actually psychologically reproduce the sound of the C from the overtones above it. So you won't actually be able to hear it, but your brain recreates it, so it'll psychologically be just like hearing it, which is kind of interesting. Now, notice that the first note to occur that's not a C is this G, is the third one here. So if you establish that you're in the key of C and you play a G, to a certain extent it sounds incomplete without the C coming after it or with it. Now this is important because it determines why G is the dominant, why it's the second most important note, why the fifth is the second most important note after the tonic, because it most strongly leads to the tonic, because it sounds incomplete actually without it. Now that takes us to the circle of fifths, which is this thing here. This is sort of like the periodic table of music in a big way. Notice that we've got C at the top here. The C scale, this is a natural symbol as opposed to a flat or a sharp. Natural just indicates that it'll be a white key, or just like an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and not any kind of sharp. And it has a natural here because the C major scale has no sharps and flats. But notice that C, over here a fifth above is G, and over here a fifth below is F, like C and the tonic, the dominant, and the subdominant. If you go all the way around this circle, what it actually does is it shows you every single note on the piano arranged by fifth. And this is actually why the piano has 12 notes, or why instruments have 12 different notes, is because if you start on C and you go up the piano by fifth, you will eventually get back to C after having played 12 notes. Which is why we have 12 notes. And earlier I was saying that the C major scale and the A minor scale are relative scales, like A is the relative minor and C is the relative major. Inside the circle of fifths here, you can see all of the relative minor scales connected to their major scale. So this is a really useful tool when you're learning all this information to help you sort of organize it and see it all laid out nicely. Also, if you can read a bit of basic music, you've got the key signatures here. I'll attach a link, obviously, to this image file so you can find it, but you can Google the circle of fifths as well. And I mean, research it and think about it. The more you learn about music, the more this circle is going to make sense, and the more different combinations of things you'll see that help you understand music. So this is definitely a huge thing. And you'll know that if you DJ, there's a program called Mixed in Key that uses I think they call it the Camelot wheel, but it's basically exactly this. It's the circle of fifths. And so if you are mixing harmonically, like if you mix your songs DJing by key rather than any other way, then you mix by fifths. So if you have a song in the key of A minor, you can mix it with another one in A minor, or something in D minor, or something in E minor, because they're a fifth apart. And as you can see in the key signatures up here, keys that are a fifth apart only have one note different in the whole scale, and so they mix together really, really well. Also, anything that's a fifth apart is going to kind of naturally work with anything a fifth away from it. So a scale with no sharps or flats will mix really well with an identical scale, or something with one flat, or something with one sharp. Just like something with, say, 4 sharps will mix well with something with 3 sharps, or something with 5 sharps. And so the circle of fifths is really, really useful, and you'll see it more and more when we start to talk about more advanced chord progressions in the part 2 of this tutorial. But I just wanted to introduce it now and get you kind of thinking about it. Also, if you can't really read music, it's worth investing a little bit of time in getting to be able to just read maybe a bit of treble clef and a bit of bass clef, or at least be able to figure out what the notes are so that you're not totally lost when you're trying to figure this stuff out. It's just a useful skill. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about is just some basic triads. So I'll go back to the keyboard here and just show some basic, just to get you started and get you thinking about chords before we really dive in part 2 and talk about, you know, advanced chords with all kinds of altered extensions and different variations and chord progressions and stuff. So you can really kind of go down the rabbit hole with this stuff. But I just wanted to show some basic triads on the keyboard down here. So if you play the first, third, and fifth note of any major scale, you get a major chord. This is a major chord or a major triad. Triad because it's got 3 notes. Now in Western music we use something called tertian harmony. Tertian just meaning like thirds. So our chords are actually all built in thirds. So if you see any chord that's got a number on it, like C9, for example. What it has to be is you start on the 1, you start on the root, then you play the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th. So you have to go all the way up through the thirds. There are a couple examples like C6, where you just like put a 6 onto a major chord. But we'll talk about those more later on. I just wanted to introduce the few basic triads. So C major we've talked about, C, E, and G. C minor, you take the 3rd and lower it to an E flat. C, E flat, and G. This is C minor. If you take a minor chord and you lower the 5th as well, C, E flat, and G flat, you have a C diminished triad. Notice earlier I was talking about intervals and how C to E is a 3rd, C to E flat is still a 3rd, C to G is a 5th, C to G flat is still a 5th, because we're talking about letter names. So it's just useful to remember that no matter what you do with chords, it's still going to be thirds almost all of the time. Like C and 2 black keys, it still has to be C, E, G, just because it's a 3rd and a 5th all the time. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, you're counting by 2s. If you take a major chord and you raise the 5th, you have a C augmented chord. In music, augmented just means to make larger, and diminished means to make smaller. I mean, there's specific chords like C, E, G sharp is going to be an augmented chord. So those are sort of the 4 basic triads: C major, C minor, C augmented, C diminished. Also, I wanted to introduce, when you take a C major chord and you raise the 3rd up to the 4th, and you have 1, 4, 5, this is actually called a suspended chord. You can remember it by thinking about, clothes suspended on a line up above the ground. So you've taken the 3rd and raised it up. That's not really where it comes from. It comes from a classical chord progression, but C suspended nevertheless, or C sus, you'll see sometimes. And then the other one is C sus 2, where you take the 3rd and you lower it to the 2nd. So it's suspended, but it's suspended down. And this is called C sus 2. You'll also see things like C add 2, where you just play a C major chord and you add the 2nd. Remember that major is always the default. So if you see a chord symbol and it just says C, it's implied that it's major. But yeah, that's sort of the basic information that I wanted to cover today. I want to keep these tutorials kind of short so you can watch them without, dedicating an hour of your life to it. But that's the basic information. If you've got any questions about this stuff, you can post comments or send me messages on Facebook or on YouTube here or whatever. But I'll be posting another tutorial shortly about just more advanced chord progression stuff, things that you'll see in jazz typically, or things that you'll see in a lot of the future-based stuff or the neon stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope that helps. And again, if you've got questions or anything's unclear, just post a comment and I'm happy to answer your questions. But I hope this helps. Good luck.